Joining us now is John Karl. He's the chief Washington correspondent for ABC News and the co-anchor of This Week with George Stephanopoulos. John, who I've known for years, has covered every beat in the Capitol, the White House, Congress, the Pentagon, the State Department, and somehow he finds time to write bestsellers in between, including The Front Row at the Trump Show and his new book, Betrayal, the final act of the Trump Show. So, John, we're speaking on the very anniversary of Biden's first year in office, but it's also the anniversary of Trump's first active year out of office. Your book, Betrayal, reports on how Trump laid the groundwork to deny the election results, in a sense foreshadowing how Trump has been able to amplify his big lie. You're right. And near the end, we now live in a nation where a large part of the population does not trust our elections. There are many reasons for this, but none greater than Donald Trump and the lies he told about the 2020 election. Question: how much did Trump's first post-presidential year cast a shadow on Biden's first year?
Well, Biden from the very start, Lynn, had to deal with that shadow. I mean, he came into office with a very bold agenda for his first 100 days, trying to be a little FDR-like. And what did he have to face immediately? Was an impeachment trial in the Senate. Of course, remember, that dominated much of the news coverage of Washington during the first weeks of the Biden presidency. So from the very beginning, he's had to kind of deal with Trump. He's rarely mentioned him by name, as you know. He has really tried to keep the focus elsewhere. And look, he's had huge issues to confront that have, that mostly Trump is irrelevant to it at this point. He had to deal obviously with his plans to get out of Afghanistan and the mess created on the way out. He now is entirely owns the COVID response, and we've had the new variants. We've had massive challenges. He's had challenges with Congress, with Democrats. So he's had a lot else to think about besides Donald Trump. But that shadow of Donald Trump, of course, is always there.
In a sense, even on Wednesday night, when the Democrats in the Senate couldn't get their 50 votes together to pass the voting rights bill, would it, in a sense, that we even needed the urgency of the voting rights bill that the Democrats don't seem to be able to pass right now? Isn't that, in a sense, also a legacy of the big lie getting traction?
It sure is, and it's more than just the big lie. It's the way Trump has used this lie that the election was stolen to go by methodically on a state by state effort where Republicans have control, to go state by state to make changes to the voting laws, to curtail things like mail-in voting and early voting, but also more profoundly, and I think more disturbing, to try to put in place officials who will do his bidding. One of the kind of one of the central themes to me of 2020 and the lead up to January 6th was that you had a series of local officials, not all of them local officials, but many local officials, statewide officials in the key states that were being contested, who were Republicans who stood up to Donald Trump. And went and did their due diligence. They had recounts, they had audits, but they refused to do his bidding and to overturn the will of the voters in their states. I mean, obviously, Brad Raffensperger in Georgia is kind of the most high profile of these, but the Republicans who serve on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors in Arizona, the Michigan Republican state legislative leaders, leaders in Pennsylvania as well, who stood up for the principle that elections need to be entirely nonpartisan in how they're conducted. Campaigns are entirely partisan, but the conduct of the elections needs to be something that where partisanship doesn't come into play. And Trump's trying to change that.
And
And
how, John, how,
that's why Democrats are so, feels that it's a matter of survival of our democracy. In some of them say,
well,
so Biden, frankly, that they have a federal effort to combat what's going on in the states.
well, given that, John, how, and that federal effort is ongoing, and it's kind of been kind of tough sledding on that front. But how dangerous is this threat to the electoral politics going forward? How concerned should voters be about it?
I think we need to be very concerned. I mean, one of the central themes of Betrayal is that Trump's efforts to overturn the election came dangerously close to succeeding. I think much closer to succeeding than most people realized at the time, and that it was, the kind of brave actions of a relative handful of mostly Republican officials, including judges, by the way, some of them Trump-appointed judges, that stood up to this effort. Trump's effort trying to erode that, so that might not happen next time. But there's another thing, and this is what I was getting at, and what you read, is that as these changes are made at the state level, and as the effort to get a federal voting rights bill fails, not only do you have Republicans having no faith, not all of them obviously, but a lot of Republicans having no faith in our elections, partly, largely because of the lies Donald Trump has said, but you've got a good chunk of Democrats who are not going to trust the next election. And you can't have a functioning democracy if people don't trust that at the end of the day, the votes will be counted and cast in a way that is fair and honest and transparent.
Well, that's why, in a sense, I see what happened last night when Senators Manchin and Sinema wouldn't allow that temporary blocking of the filibuster to allow some changes in federal law that could enforce the voting, enforce parts of the Voting Rights Act that was struck down. The point is, though, that Biden is coming into the midterms having to confront this reality. Also, by the way, he had this record-long press conference yesterday.
Oh my God, that was amazing, wasn't it?
54 minutes. Just so our listeners know, that is the record longest by many minutes of anything Trump or Obama did. And of course, this is one of the themes that came in and out of it. But do you have a sense, by the way, of what the Biden play might be, given the context that we're talking about? Trump's big lie has saturated the electorate in a stunning way. And let me back up a minute. Since you have been observing Trump for years, and you're one of the leading Trumpologists, can you explain and analyze the power he has to quickly be able to infiltrate the political consciousness for some people in this utterly persuasive way, and that this is sticking in his post-presidency?
I mean, it is remarkable that he has this hold on Republican voters, and it's so unusual because, as you know, the well-established pattern tradition is that when a president leaves the White House, whether because the second term is up or they've been defeated, or in the case of Richard Nixon, they've resigned, they kind of disappear. And they may go out and do things. Jimmy Carter did all his humanitarian work. George W. Bush took up painting. Barack Obama's going to do Netflix or whatever he's going to do. And, he's got the big plans for the library in Chicago. Richard Nixon went out and worked on his memoirs. The idea of a former president being, from almost the get-go here, directly trying to be the kingmaker in the party is just something we haven't seen.
Oh, right.
And to be second guessing his successor on a regular basis. So he does have this kind of mythic hold. But Lynn, I think there is some evidence that hold is loosening at least a bit. One thing I thought was interesting just yesterday, John Bolton, his former national security advisor turned huge Trump critic, obviously, released some polls that he had commissioned, suggesting that the number of Republican voters defining themselves as Trump Republicans has declined, and that Trump's overall favorability rating among Republicans, while still overwhelmingly majority, think highly of him, that number's declining. And, we're going to have a series of primaries over the next few months where candidates who have been endorsed enthusiastically by Donald Trump may or may not win. And I think we'll have a little bit of a sense of just whether or not, just what clothes the emperor is actually wearing here.
And actually, in Illinois, we have a really good example. We have one congressional district where two incumbents, Republicans, are pitted against each other. Rodney Davis, and who is a fixture in the Capitol, you probably know and have covered through the years, and a freshman, Mary Miller, who is in the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the Republican Party, and Trump has endorsed her. So Laura and I will be watching that carefully through the election season leading up to our June primary. Laura, now I know you had.
How does it look? And how do you assess that race?
Well, Rodney Davis it's a central to downstate Illinois district. And I have to give Davis a running start because he's been in some big bruising election battles in the past against Democrats. The district he's in now in the remap is safe Republican, but before this, the Dems thought they could take him out. And so he's been in big races. His name is out. He did prevail against two big pushes by Democrats to get him out. So as he likes to say, Democrats have spent millions of dollars getting his name pushed out. So he's just better known. And we'll see how. I'm waiting for the fundraising numbers. She did pretty good as a grassroots fundraiser using the Trump, appealing to the Trump base, but he's got a lock on a lot of campaigns. But anyway, going back to, so actually this is like a big deal, little laboratory example.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah, I think it's a real litmus test, Lynn. I think you're right to see it in Illinois it's a really important state to watch. In terms of before we move on, though, I wanted to pick up on, John, what you said about this poll and how about it might appear that Trump's grip may be loosening a bit on the Republican base. If that's the case, and we don't know if there's a trend yet, what do you think might be behind that? Why might that be happening now?
I think it's his single-minded focus on 2020, looking squarely in the past. And I think Republicans sense a real opportunity with Joe Biden's vulnerabilities, his, obviously near historically low approval rating for a president at the end of the first year, with anxiety in the country about the economy. The Republicans feel they have a real opportunity to take back the House, maybe take back the Senate. And, Trump is focused on talking about an election that was in the past. And, one other bigger maybe litmus test is Trump has been beating the drum to get rid of Mitch McConnell as the Republican leader. Now for over a year. McConnell's still there. You did have Lindsey Graham come out and say, he's not sure he's going to support him, and he needs the next leader needs to be a Trump Republican essentially. So we'll see what happens to Mitch McConnell. But the fact that Mitch McConnell can say what he has said about Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump can savagely attack him and say he should be gone, and he's just marching along, he's doing his thing. I think that certainly among those Republicans that are kind of, call them Republican operatives, that are working on the campaign to take back the Congress, they know that they cannot, or they believe they cannot antagonize Trump. They need the energy that he brings in, some of the fundraising he brings in for sure. But they also think that the message that he's giving could get in the way of winning some of these races.
Well, you mentioned Mitch McConnell, and Joe Biden took a big hit at Mitch McConnell yesterday in his remarkable press conference. What's your assessment of how that press conference went for him yesterday? It was very important, and rolling up the anniversary of his first year in office. How did he do it? How much good did he do himself yesterday?
First of all, we believe he did break the record. I talked to you guys all know Martha Kumar, who kind of tracks all the stats on presidential press conferences, and she believes it's a record. It's hard to say because we don't have the times for all that, but I think the number 2 press conference was one in 1996 that Bill Clinton did, where Mike McCurry was off on the side as press secretary, telling him stop. It kept on going. Usually a long rambling press conference is not good for a president. I actually thought, though, Biden got better towards the end. I mean, the last 40 minutes of that press conference were better than the first 40 minutes. When he goes out there and they try to tell him exactly who to call on and what order, he's reading the names. When he's out there just kind of being himself, he's looser. But look, I think there was one significant problem in that press conference, and that was what he said about Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
And, in suggesting that a minor incursion, a little invasion might not be a big, might not bring the same response as a major invasion. Now, that's probably true, by the way. He was probably telling the truth, but you can't have the president of the United States appear to give a green light to Vladimir Putin to make a, quote, minor incursion.
Yeah, and that sent off flares in Kiev.
Yeah, it sure did. Yeah.
And it also showed, I thought, that Biden really didn't have the pulse locked in of what he thought our NATO allies were going to do, because part of what the Biden administration has been trying to do is speak in one voice with NATO on Ukraine. But so was there cleanup in aisle 4 afterwards?
I mean, there's certainly an effort. We saw Kamala Harris go on the morning shows trying to do some cleanup on that. But, it was the only thing that was striking about that is you heard Joe Biden talking about the divisions in NATO. And again, if he's like Joe Biden, the analyst, if he's, if that was Lynn Sweet saying that, that'd be fine. It's actually true. The NATO's not all on the same page about how to respond to Putin. But you don't have the president kind of openly musing, well, we're not really unified on this, but we'd be really unified on that. I mean, it's just, it was just kind of surprising because obviously Biden's a foreign policy pro. I mean, the guy was basically the Congress's ambassador to the world, as the Senate Foreign Relations chairman for all those years. Maybe all that knowledge kind of got in the way, and he forgot he was speaking as the commander in chief and not as a foreign policy expert.
Well, and I think this came up as one of the questions that came out of the press conference yesterday was, is he losing it? Is he? Does he have issues? And there's polls out that say a lot of voters think he does. What do you think about that question?
Well, look, I think that was a question that was asked by James Rosen, formerly of Fox News, now of Newsmax, somebody I think we all know well over the years. And it was a very uncomfortable question to hear asked. But the answer was probably the best answer that Biden gave in the press conference. It was like, I have no idea. And he moved right on. For him to speak for 2 hours, almost 2 hours, and truly get into the weeds on some of this stuff, it was hard to watch that. You might question the performance overall and how effective it was politically for him. But it did not look like somebody that had lost it, to speak bluntly. I mean, he's clearly capable of thinking through the major issues. But yeah, people do have, look, Biden is a guy that from a young age had a problem stuttering, as we know, and sometimes you see him work through that even now. And a lot of people see that and interpret that as somebody who's lost a step or several steps. And, and I think it is something he has to address more, not necessarily by answering a question like that one, but by demonstrating that he's a guy that is quite comfortable, even at the age of 78, thinking on his feet.
So looking at the year ahead, the voting rights is not going to happen right now. He said, this was interesting at the press conference, he thinks he could break up Build Back Better and get something passed. So is year 2 going into the midterms going to be the year in bite-sized chunks instead of big Building Back Better? Is it building back best we can?
Building back with little bites. Yeah. I mean, he's not going to get any massive another multi-trillion-dollar efforts through Congress again. And to his credit, he's entirely correct. He did pass two of the biggest bills that, even adjusted for inflation, we've ever seen. The COVID relief bill, the infrastructure, these are huge.
Right. So if they didn't try to raise expectations so much, Jonathan, it would have been more of a pure, I guess, messaging point. We did American Rescue Plan, big, infrastructure, big.
Yeah.
States are flooded with money, cities, county flooded. So is this just a flaw of all the White House people who do this, that they just thought they had to raise hope so much, especially with the base, on things that they knew or should have known would be hard to deliver?
I mean, part of it's it's a Democratic Party writ large, not necessarily White House staff, but you had progressives in Congress literally referring to this $1 trillion+ infrastructure bill as crumbs. Like, we're not just going to take the crumbs. I remember one of the progressive House members saying,
I was with Mayor Lori Lightfoot in Washington on Wednesday. She's here for the Conference of Mayors. And she was talking to me when we were chatting about how much money is getting to Chicago from federal Washington. It is historic.
I mean, New York's talking about surpluses. The New York State government. When does that ever happen? Andrew Cuomo's thinking, why did I leave?
One of the reasons some blue chip Republican establishment people in Illinois decided not to run against Governor Pritzker is because they were going to run on the lousy state finances, and now they can't because there's so much federal money. I forgot to add, I think there are three big things that Biden did accomplish as we speak on his anniversary: American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure bill, and a really big number of judges. And they are historic picks because for the first time you have diversity in race and gender, and public defenders have been in the pipeline. Am I missing anything, Jonathan and Laura?
No, and these are significant accomplishments, no question. And if you listen to Biden yesterday, you got the sense that he thinks that maybe the biggest problem, his biggest flaw, was not selling them as aggressively and telling people about them. I don't think it's quite that simple. I mean, there is anxiety in the country. Inflation is at an all-time, not an all-time high, but near an all-time high, and he talked about how for the first time American workers got a raise, referring to the real wage growth, which was significant, and that's true, but it also wasn't as much as the inflation rate. So, how real was it to most people? And it's and there have been clear stumbles, and I think that on one hand, Afghanistan and raised questions about competence, also national security, but about these were the top experts. These are the people that the Trump people are gone. Now we have the people that really know what they're doing. And then you see the disaster that unfolded in Kabul. And then on COVID, which was the thing that he from the start had the highest approval rating on, and even a lot of Republicans, thinking that he had the right approach, and you see the kind of mess over testing and the mess over messaging coming out of the CDC. So there have been some significant stumbles, but major accomplishments as well.
Well, I would want to pick up on a couple of things, and the whole issue with Afghanistan, of course, is front and center, and then of course Ukraine as well. But I guess the question is how much domestic versus international issues will play in terms of voters' concerns this year, and that remains to be seen. I wanted to segue to a couple of things that we sort of touched on. One is Kamala Harris. As you mentioned, she was doing the talk shows today to sort of do some cleanup work for Biden. Is that her job, to be the cleanup lady? And there have been a lot of debate over how the White House is using her and how they're deploying her. And a lot of her supporters would say they're deploying her more often for the dirty work, like what I just referred to, as opposed to productive work that can help advance her as a politician and as a vice president.
Well, there's a storied history of vice presidents being given the thankless tasks. So, you could certainly argue she's been given, given first of all issues where it's nearly impossible, if not impossible, to show progress. I mean, she was given the voting rights portfolio. That's not going to change the fact that they didn't have the votes and they weren't going to have the votes. And she was given the border. An intransigent problem if there ever was one. But sometimes. First of all, I thought it was very interesting that he actually got asked, and it's a question a lot of people have been asking, would she be on the ticket? I mean, I've always assumed, of course, if Biden runs, he's not going to ditch Kamala Harris. I mean, that would be a whole series of other problems. Even if you think that she's not the strongest vice president, you can't do that without like raising all kinds of questions about why you chose her and you betrayed her. And I mean, it'd be just a mess. And no Democrats are out there beating the drums to get rid of Kamala Harris. But so the fact that he was asked, but he gave, again, probably the second best answer of that press conference was, Harris, the interesting question, and it's fascinating actually, that in both parties, the Democratic and Republican parties, you have this, the two looming figures, Biden and Trump, and there's a real possibility that neither one of them actually runs for re-election. I mean, Biden has said he intends to, but he's also said, who knows what, he's talked about fate. He hasn't said it's a definite. He hasn't, filed papers to run yet, all that kind of stuff. And Trump, I actually don't think is going to run. A lot of people think he is going to run, but there's certainly uncertainty about that. And how different does the world look if neither one of them is running in 2024?
Why don't you think
Kamala Harris then becomes a candidate for president for the Democratic nomination, and it will not be handed to her. She will have to fight for that.
It'll be a dogfight. But why do you think that Trump's not going to run?
I think, again, that he's focused so on 2020. He doesn't seem like he's a guy focused on 2024 or even 2022. I think that he enjoys life in Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster during the summer, being the kind of kingmaker and calling all the shots. Running for president is a grind. He knows that. He did it before. I'm not so sure, reading him, that he wants to do that again. And I also think that maybe the biggest reason of all is that he has a real fear of losing. I mean, clearly he couldn't acknowledge he lost in 2020. And I don't think that he wants to face the possibility of losing again. And however weak you think Joe Biden is, Trump's got some real, is absolutely toxic among independent voters. So as popular as he is among Republicans, he lost by 7 million votes last time, and then January 6th happened. So,
and we also have out there the New York investigations of his business going on. Who knows if that will lead to indictments? His top associate already has been indicted. So we just have some more twists and turns of the investigations against him. We're in our closing minutes, and we have, as your book foreshadowed, you kind of laid the predicate of what led up to January 6th, and we have the January 6th commission going on. As we speak, the commission just won a big victory in the Supreme Court to get some of Trump's papers or records for that day. What is the thing that you think is most important for the January 6th committee to find out or just lock into place, if nothing else, for history?
First of all, I think that the Supreme Court rejecting Trump's efforts to keep his documents secret is hugely significant and will open up an entire new window on what was going on in the White House. We're going to see what Trump has tried to keep from seeing, the visitor logs, who was coming to the White House, who was calling him. We're going to see the communications with his aides. They've asked for video and photographic records. Trump always had a photographer around him. I don't know if there was a photographer inside the White House taking pictures on January 6th, but I assume there was. There were the video outtakes of that video message he gave on January 6th in the evening. Very interesting to see. This is all material that the committee should be getting now that the Supreme Court has paved the way. So I think it's very significant. But I think the most important thing they can do is to hold high-profile public hearings with people who you and I, Lynn and Laura, we know what these people have said, but people haven't actually seen in front of the cameras at a witness table Bill Barr, the Attorney General, the Trump loyalist, come out and say it's all bullshit. All of those are his words. Excuse me, family programming, but those were his words to me in an interview, which I wrote about and I wrote in my book. That's one thing. To see him say it, somebody with the gravitas of Barr, the respected Barr commands among Trump voters, say that, I think is hugely significant. To see John Kelly, we all know what John Kelly has said and how much of a threat he thinks, Trump is. But Kelly's done precious few interviews and no real major sit down in front of the camera to say what he has said. He's a guy, retired four-star Marine general. He was Trump's chief of staff. He was the Secretary of Homeland Security. He did all of Trump's bidding on the border. This is not some squishy liberal. Put him out there and have him talk about how he thinks Trump became a threat to the United States. I think those events, even though the actual news, we know what those people think now, but we've never seen them in a huge public forum with the eyes of the nation on it, saying that. These are people that can speak to Republicans, not just to the echo chamber that's watching the the non-Fox cable news channels. So I think that may be the most important thing they can do. I mean, who knows? These documents may reveal some kind of a big smoking gun. I wouldn't hold your breath for that. I think they're going to be very interesting. But the public hearings, people that were close to Trump, people who are not Democrats. This is not Adam Schiff. This is John Kelly, Bill Barr. And then I would put, less high profile, but I think potentially very strong in a forum like this, those Republican state leaders, conservative Republicans who said what Trump was saying is just not true.
Well,
that'll have an impact, I think.
And with that, we do know that whatever the committee does, they've got to get it done this year because there's the risk of losing the House.
Oh, yeah.
And that will be the first thing out. Anyway, John Karl, thank you so much for joining us. John is the author of Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for our next segment where we do a deep dive into local politics.
Laura and Lynn, thank you very much.
Great having you.